Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just about 1 minute. Yes, and please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. So we'll go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. So just wanted to say good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our session, Supporting Multilingual Learners' Home Language Development. My name is Carolyn Corlott, and I'm the Director of Dual Language Learner Programs for Early Edge California. And I'm joined here by our partners at the Sobrato Early Academic Language. Today is the third and final session of our webinar series for pre-K to third grade educators of multilingual learners. And as the last two, this will be an interactive webinar with prompts for you to share your responses in the chat. So please feel free to add your responses as well as any questions that you have to the Q&A box. And then our presenters will answer them either throughout the webinar or at the end of the session. And we'll also be sending a follow-up email with a certificate of attendance as well as links to the materials so that you can access them after the webinar. And please feel free to share these resources with your colleagues as well. So I would like to now introduce our presenters this afternoon. We have with us Ana Marisol Sanchez, Program Coordinator, and Cory Wechsler, Program Coordinator at SEAL. I'll now pass it over to you, Marisol.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and welcome. Welcome to today's session on supporting multilinguals' home language development. We are so looking forward to spending this afternoon with you. As you heard, I'm Ana Marisol Sanchez, and I am joined by my colleague, Cory Wechsler. And on behalf of SEAL, I want to express how grateful we are that we get to connect with you today. We are passionate about our dual language learners and are so glad that we get to have a conversation with you about what it means to center them and their families in our early learning spaces. And I'd like to start today by inviting you to share. I know it's the end of the day, it's 4 o'clock, you may have had a long day or a long week, but I want to ask you, what is one thing that has made you smile this week? Maybe it happened today. So go ahead and share in the chat. What is one thing that has made you smile today? Oh, Usha's grandson. Nadija's watching her 2 cats play. Mia tried a new meal this week. Oh, dogs, fresh strawberries. Ah, all those things are already making me smile. Oh, Crystal, it's your son's birthday today. Happy birthday to him. Keep some of those things coming. I so appreciate just giving you a moment. Hopefully you appreciate getting a little moment just to pause from our busy lives so that we can reflect on all the things in our lives that bring us joy and pleasure and make us smile. So thank you for engaging in that. And you are making me smile today. So both Cory and I work for SEAL, which stands for Sobrato Early Academic Language. We are a nonprofit organization committed to ensuring all dual language learners and English learners learn, thrive, and lead. For over a decade now, we have worked to disrupt inequity in the educational system by placing dual language learners at the center of our work. And we do this by partnering with public education agencies across the state, districts, sites to transform their systems through professional learning and technical assistance, and by advocating for state-level changes that focus on the needs of dual language learners. And to learn more about our organization and the work we do, we invite you to visit our website at seal.org. And Seal is honored to work with Early Edge and be part of the Multilingual Learning Toolkit and the collaborative effort that took place in bringing together many wonderful research-based instructional practices that will support you in meeting the needs of young multilingual learners and their families. And it's a wonderful online resource. Hopefully by now, since it's the third of this series, hopefully you've had a chance to play with it and to look at what's in there. And we hope that you've had the opportunity to continue to explore. And if not, don't worry, there's still time because it's still accessible to you. As you see here, the toolkit is organized into 11 instructional topics, ranging from family engagement to home language development, assessment, and more. And under each topic, you'll find a wide assortment of research-based key principles, instructional practices, and accompanying resources to support educators working with young multilingual learners. And today, it's the last of the 3 webinar series that Seal has put together and offering this season. And particularly today, these sessions, well, you got those 3 sessions, and today we're going to be focusing on this final one, supporting multilingual learners' home language development. And it's designed specifically with teachers of English instructed classrooms in mind. So today, we're going to begin by sharing some of the leading research on English learners and on home language and the implication this has on our own instructional approach and the practices we use with dual language learners. We'll look at the absolutely critical role of the home-school partnership, and then we're going to explore different ways to incorporate home language into instruction, as well as opportunities to engage families at home. And to ground us in this topic, I'm going to share with you a quick video clip. It's part of a longer 10-minute video that we will share with you after today's session. As you're watching it, please go into the chat and share important points that are being made. So what are some points that you're going to hear as you watch? And you can do this while you're watching the clip, but I will give you a moment afterwards to type in your thoughts. So here we go.
Do you guys want to sing the good morning song? Yeah. Good morning, good morning. How are you? How are you?
After decades of an English-only era in this state, teachers have had the experience of teaching as if there's no room for home language or there's no role for home language, despite the fact that our research has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger about the role of home language. That is not yet happening in most classrooms.
Buenos días, buenos días, ¿cómo estás?
So teachers have some retooling to do. And our approach to what an English-taught environment should be in this 21st century with so many dual language learners has to really develop so that our kids can thrive.
Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to have some of our students present their family projects. And we have a couple different languages that we're going to represent today.
So obviously, if I only speak English, I cannot be teaching children in their home language. And yet, there are powerful things that can be done in my classroom to create the environment that supports bilingualism, the environment that invites them to use their home language and cultivate their home language, that will make a difference for them. And that's the set of skills and strategies that all of our teachers need in every classroom in this state.
Los idiomas que usan mi familia son español e inglés.
From the moment a child is born, they're honing in on language. So by the time they enroll in school, they already have years of experience in a language. When they walk into a classroom that's an English-only environment, and that language and all of the knowledge they've encoded in their brain in that language are not so accessible and relevant to this English environment, several things happen. One is a big gap as they're waiting to learn enough English to catch up, and so participation and comprehension and learning all the things you should be learning in school get hampered. Secondly, the participation of their families really gets cut down because their families don't speak the language that's the language of the schools. Third, they develop attitudes and understandings about how the world feels about their home language, the development of shame, the development of rejection of home language, with all of the impacts that has on their identity development as well, is really harming.
I like to read in Spanish because that's how we talk in my family. We talk in Spanish.
First of all,
Okay, so I am going to give you a moment to just respond in terms of what points are being made in this particular video. I'm going to put that also in the chat for you to be able to respond. Yeah, classroom practices aren't always matching the research. Children lose out when their home language isn't being acknowledged. Asset-based rather than deficit-based. Yes, that is what we are aiming for. The need for multilingual teachers. The culture. Gap in learning. Reaffirmation of their own value. I love that. Incorporating home language and culture. Actitud, your attitude towards it. Well, thank you so much. There's so many things that in that really, really short clip, like really are very pointed points. And what we're going to try to do is kind of unpack some of those throughout our webinar today. So what we want to offer you is a brief framing for today's work and the reason why we felt it was important to highlight these pieces, particularly in classrooms that are instructed in English. We know that California is home to the nation's largest population of dual language learners, with nearly 60% of children in California, 5 and under, living in homes where a language other than English is spoken. The majority of those children speak Spanish at home. And there are at least 59 other languages represented in California schools, making many of our classrooms multilingual classrooms, even when the instruction is conducted in English. And within this context, there's an incredibly strong narrative about the value of English and English only. And that, among other things, can undermine the importance of children's home language. And I'm curious, what kind of messages have you personally received if you have heard from families about home language and bilingualism? I'm actually going to read some of the things that might be prevalent, things that you may have heard, myths that you may or may not have heard. And I'm going to read some of these out loud. And I'm going to invite you that in the chat, you make note of whether or not you have heard this. So for instance, as I read the first one, learning 2 languages confuses children. If this is something you have heard expressed by a family member or somewhere else, go ahead and type 1 in the chat. So let's see how many people have heard that. Woo! Lots of you have heard that. Sherry has heard that. Sandra has heard that. Claudia has heard that. What about this one? Speaking their home language will hinder children's development of English. Have you ever heard that one? Go ahead and type number 2 if you've heard that. Lots of people have heard this one too. Jasleen has heard this one. How about number 3? English is the only language necessary for success. Have you ever heard this one? Go ahead and type in number 3. I see that 3 going and going and going and going. What about number 4? English immersion is the best way for a child to learn English. Have you heard that? Looks like many of you. Some people say no. Sandra says that she hasn't heard that. What about number 5? Children will maintain their home language while they learn English. Have you ever heard this one? Okay. I want you to take a moment, just a quick moment, to notice the kinds of feelings and thoughts that are coming up for you personally as you hear these myths. How have you seen these messages impacting your children and families? How have they impacted you? So just take a moment to reflect on how this is landing for you. I see some mad faces. Whoa, a lot of emotion. Andrea. Whew. It's sad. Yes, yes, Cory. Makes me sad too, but there's a lot that we can do. So we now have years of research that confirms over and over again that dismissing home language and elevating English only actually has a tremendous negative impact on children's social identity and their ability to develop strong, positive relationships with family members. And it also directly affects how successful they are in school. Conversely, this research has also confirmed over and over again the importance and benefits of home language development. And I want to call out 6 key research findings regarding bilingualism that directly counter the myths that we just heard about. First, all children have the capacity to learn 2 or more languages. Although languages can be learned at any age, it is during the ages of 0 to 8 that children can develop near native-like proficiency in multiple languages. The research also shows that having a strong home language supports children in learning English. I want to emphasize this one. Having a strong home language supports children in learning English and learning other languages. And the opposite is true as well. When children don't have a strong foundation in their home language, they have a much harder time acquiring a second language. And this has huge implications for us as teachers, especially if we're only teaching in English instructed classrooms. So for all languages, whether it's English, Spanish, Korean, or other languages, children do need exposure to the component of language role models. And lastly, this is so critical for everyone, including families, to be aware of. Studies show that early exposure to English without attention to home language can result in the loss of home language, which can in turn make acquiring English even more difficult. So again, especially giving this message to families is important. And it was previously believed that the bilingual brain consisted of 2 brains, each speaking different languages. For example, when you spoke English, you use one part of your brain, and while speaking another language, you would use another part of your brain or half of your brain. And we now know that in fact, the bilingual brain is not separated by language, but it combines what is known in one language with what is learned and known in the other. There's transferability that happens and develops and helps develop the other language. And it is this aspect of being able to draw upon both sets of languages that enhances a person's ability to learn, understand, and develop languages. And as a matter of fact, there are physiological and neurological distinctions in a bilingual brain that are not present in a monolingual brain. And the big piece to know here is that knowing one language, particularly your home language, enhances your ability to acquire another language. And as part of helping to debunk myths and providing research-based information, families also need to know the benefits of being bilingual, the most salient of those you see depicted on your screen. I'm going to give you a moment to take a look at those. But I want to hone in on one particular benefit. As we look to our young people's future, research shows us that bilingual students are less likely to drop out of school, more likely to go to 4-year colleges, and to engage in a wider variety of sectors of society. Therefore, the benefit becomes one that equalizes their access and participation. In other words, bilingualism not only prevents long-term English learners, but positions them for future success. So I just shared a lot of research about home language, and I want to briefly call your attention to 2 critical research findings that are sort of umbrella of these. One is that strong home school connections are essential, and the other is that affirming, caring relationships and environments impact development, motivation, and participation in learning. And these are deeply interrelated and dependent on one another, as you will see in a moment. And this is the research that needs to inform our work and should be at the forefront, guiding everything that we do in our programs and practice and the interactions that we have with children and families. And with all that information, with just thinking about your position in all of this, one critical role that we play as educators and that feels absolutely necessary to call out during this webinar specifically is that of being a home language advocate. Knowing what you know now about the research, or probably you knew some of it already and now you're sort of revisiting or maybe adding to your knowledge on home language, it is really important that you're going to think about the way in which you're going to have ongoing conversations with your families about this, unpacking and debunking the pervasive and harmful myths surrounding language, use of home language and bilingualism that so many of our families have internalized for years and years and years is a really big part of this. So I'm going to give you another moment to sort of think about all of this. And from this research section that I just shared, what is something that you're still going to be thinking about next week? Again, it's maybe something you already knew, but now it's highlighted, or maybe it is something new. So in the chat, if you could please share with us, what's something that's going to stay in your mind and you're still going to be thinking about next week? How to encourage colleagues to continue being an advocate for home language. Yeah. And be that yourself too, right? The importance of maintaining the home language. Yes, encouraging those just to speak their home language. Yeah, encourage families to speak their home language and feel pride with it. Dual language learners need to be encouraged to use their home language. Yes, Sylvia. Yes, to be that strong advocate whenever and wherever possible. Yeah, you can't solve it all, but in the places that we can, let's take that lead and be those advocates. Opportunities in the classroom. Yes, yes. How are we doing that in the classroom? We are going to get into that in a moment. Thank you so much for that engagement, and keep it coming. I'm going to keep going, but feel free to keep that coming.
Marisol, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
In terms of home language advocate, do you talk later about just that dance between like the partnership? We're going to get to that. Okay. I just feel like it's super important because people are really like moved by that and feel the importance. And I want to make sure that we're layering on the complexity of it as well. Okay. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so we in California are incredibly lucky to live in a state that has called on us to enact that research. And as a matter of fact, the California English Learner Roadmap, which was adopted in July of 2017, calls us to action. And this important English learner policy essentially undid Proposition 227. If you remember, Proposition 227 required California public schools to teach in English only, which effectively eliminated all bilingual programs. And the EL roadmap lays out a clear vision and direction for California, one that centers English learners and dual language learners. And it specifically calls upon every educator, school and district in the state to work towards enacting an assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools that provide meaningful access to the full curriculum through engaging in high-quality intellectual work, and it calls upon our systems to provide the conditions to make such education possible. This first principle is very explicit. The languages and cultures English learners bring to their education are assets for their own learning and are important contributions to the learning community. These assets are valued and built upon in culturally responsive curriculum and instruction and in programs that support, whenever possible, the development and proficiency of multiple languages. So given all that we know about the importance of home language, and given that we are all guided by the EL roadmap when it comes to dual language learners, it needs to be a priority of every teacher, and particularly those dual language learners in English instructed classrooms, to do some deep thinking about and planning for how to ensure every child's home language is present, recognized, affirmed, and supported. And while there's no single formula for how much, when, where, and how, it is imperative that children see and hear their language to the degree you can make that happen in the classroom. And what we're aiming for is for kids to be able to have the space in your classrooms where they are openly, confidently, and happily encouraged to develop their home language. So there are 4 guiding questions that can help focus our efforts as you consider how you're going to support home language development in the classroom. And the first guiding question is really a 2-part guiding question, and it's how are you fostering partnerships with families, and who else on staff can support you? Next is, what content are you working on? Just as you want to support English development in the context of what the children are exploring, you want to support home language development within the actual content too. And then you ask yourself, where are opportunities to incorporate children's home language? And finally, you want to consider what prompts connected to the content can you send home to support the use of children's home language? So we're going to begin by looking at the first 2-part question. And we'll go into the next slide, please. So bluntly said, this work cannot happen without families. And so we begin by looking at a critical, very important part of a 2-way homeschool partnership. And much of the material on the homeschool partnership was introduced much in more detail during our March webinar on affirming children's languages, cultures, and identities. And really these 2 webinars, that first one and this one, very well complement each other. For deeper grounding on this topic, I encourage you to listen to the recording if you weren't able to attend. But that said, there are some key things that we want to highlight for you. The first is the idea of a 2-way relationship that shifts the dynamic from teacher as a sole holder of knowledge to viewing families as also being holders of knowledge. Families bring with them a wealth of wisdom, including their language, history, culture, as well as rich life experiences. Families have stories to share about their lives and perspectives. They bring with them a wealth of skills that, unless we are actively seeking to know about, might very well go unnoticed. Here are a couple of examples of some of these skills that families were able to share with the class during a clothing study in preschool. I was just in Educare last week, so this is one of those examples. So the teacher reached out to families for ideas on how to create a meaningful dramatic play area related to the theme, and one of the children's fathers volunteered to make a washing machine made out of cardboard so children could engage in talking about clothes and washing them. He came in to teach the children how to carefully use it, but did so using his home language, Spanish. You can see the creativity, the talent, and patience that it took to create this. And while only a few students spoke Spanish in the class, everyone easily understood how to be careful with this new washing machine. And it was a great joy to see the kiddos enjoy that. And during the same unit, another family member who was a professional seamstress came and showed the children how to make aprons. She brought some of her tools, patterns, and fabric. She invited them to choose their own fabric and pattern. They helped trace, and she took those home and cut them and sewed them. So the children ended up with these very unique aprons, as you can see the Spider-Man one here. So this mother, of course, became a celebrity with the children as they loved wearing their aprons. And she had done all of this in Arabic with the children because that was her home language. So again, all these wonderful contributions came about based on the teacher's willingness to reach out and provide the time for families to come in and share using their home language, and ensuring that the contributions were included in the learning environment. And as you can see, incorporating family knowledge into the classroom and curriculum enhances the overall learning community. Connecting with families in this way is essential. It is what we mean by an asset-based approach. So where does this work begin? The first step toward this meaningful partnership is that teachers make a concerted effort to get to know each of their families. And this is not a new concept, and actually it's a strength of the early learning field. In the Multilingual Learners Toolkit, when you click on family engagement, several subcategories will pop up. And you can see the first two are all about gathering information about children's languages and being in conversation with families about the language and learning goals they have for their children. You can see that many resources are available, including these two interview templates. Both offer a wide range of questions that can help guide these conversations. They focus both on becoming familiar with the language and cultural background of families, as well as offer other questions that can deepen your knowing of each family and your relationship to them. And when you connect with and nurture your relationship with families in an ongoing, intentional manner, you're building a trusting foundation from which to partner. And being able to engage in meaningful, thoughtful, respectful conversations with families about the importance of home language, just as we saw, we really want to get into that, and being able to connect with them around their expertise can be a very complex endeavor. Therefore, it is necessary to first build that foundational trust, as Cory was mentioning earlier. Being careful, for example, as you share the research that might go against what families have understood to be true about language. And a huge part of deepening that trust is being able to engage in respectful conversations, specifically about language, that both honor their experience and desires, while also challenge harmful myths they might still be holding on to. And in building these relationships, your families, you're creating this foundation from which you can tap into them also as the language experts that they are. And while you may not be proficient in the home language, they are. And when it comes to supporting home language development in the classroom, your families are your greatest resource and teacher. And when we position families as language experts, several things occur. Educators begin to build those strong family partnerships, develop positive attitudes amongst the children about multilingualism, model being a lifelong language learner alongside the children, curious and excited. And it also ends up shaping the curriculum. And it turns out that families then become part of the learning. In turn, this offers a reflection of the children's worlds. So that was another strategy that we spent time in March, and we encourage you to learn about it via the recording if you didn't attend that one, or go to the Multilingual Learners Toolkit and read about this strategy. You'll find the strategy overview and template under several topics, and one place you can look is under the Family Engagement 1A. So, how have you already been successful in building relationships with families? So we're going to take a moment to give you some reflection time in terms of the ways that you've already been successful with connecting with them. Home visits and regular phone calls, including them, family engagement projects. Yay, some of the things that we're going to share with you are really going to resonate with what you are already doing. More communication with parents. Wonderful. Asking for help in class celebrations, asking for putting up family pictures. Wonderful. Again, this is one of our strengths. So in the early learning space, this is a strength. So definitely tap into the things that you have been doing thus far. So there's one last piece in terms of the partnerships that I want to highlight. And this is who else on the staff can support you. So beyond the families, it's also important to identify who in the staff can partner with you around this work. What other languages do the other teachers or teacher assistants speak? What about other site staff? You want to be drawing from all the wonderful language resources that you actually might already have at your disposal. So be thinking about who you can partner up with. So I am actually going to hand it over to my dear Cory, who's going to be talking to us more about what this looks like in the classroom.
Thanks, Marisol, and hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I'm feeling so inspired and remembering all over again how much I love early learning teachers. So we're going to take a look now at what home language development means and looks like. One way we can help children internalize positive and affirming messages about bilingualism and multilingualism is by making sure those languages are not only present in the classroom, but actually integrated into instruction. And this is particularly important in English instructed classes where English is the dominant language. I want to be super clear that this is not the same as teaching in another language. We are offering the space for children to be able to use their home language in meaningful ways in the classroom so that their home language is seen as an asset. We are inviting them to be language experts in their own right, and we are exposing them to key vocabulary so they are in fact hearing their home language. All of this helps children internalize the value and worth of their home language, and this in turn nurtures a community of multilingual learners. In order to incorporate home language into instruction, we need to consider the second and third guiding questions. What content are you working on? And once you're clear on what the content or theme is, you're ready to go for this next guiding question, which is, where are opportunities to incorporate children's home language in the work that we're doing? So in answer to that, there are many opportunities, and you will see that while we have overarching categories to talk about them, there's a lot of overlap, and this is not at all exhaustive. So what is the language children need in order to participate in the unit and in conversations? Just as you want to support English language development within the content of what the children are exploring, you want to support home language development within the actual content as well. So here's a page from an insects unit. Thus we ask ourselves, what type of language is needed to talk about insects? You have to first make some really intentional decisions about what vocabulary to highlight in children's home languages. And then you can look for the natural opportunities to fold that language into your activities. Of course, doing this work in partnership with families and other staff members who know the languages of the children. So here's an example from an insects unit. Thinking ahead of time about the categories and the content offers guidance about which words to highlight in the children's multiple languages. So as these words insects, honeybee, ladybug, and concepts such as characteristics, action, habitat are used, you can refer to them in all the different languages. And in doing so, not only are you affirming children's languages, but you are actually exposing children then also to those other languages. So here are a few examples of how teachers incorporated children's home languages into the classroom. The teacher of this classroom on the left chose key activities in which she included vocabulary in Spanish, her class being made up of English and Spanish speaking families. And she did this in a couple of ways. Sometimes she would ask her class for help. Does anyone know how to say butterfly in Spanish? And what a beautiful way of centering the children as language experts. And she also asked families for help regularly and would narrate this out loud for the children. It's sounding something like, I didn't know how to say these words in Spanish, and so I had to ask Julio's mom to help me. As such, she was modeling for the children being a language learner alongside them, which I think Renuka or someone else mentioned earlier on in chat, just how amazing it is also for the adults to be language learners aside the children. So it might be that the children are giving you the word if they know it, or it might be that you're investigating how to say it, or it might be both. Key is that there is the constant invitation of children to be the experts, of inviting them to share their language and their knowledge. On the right side, you see an example of a classroom that was made up primarily of Spanish speakers, but one child spoke Vietnamese. And so the teacher made sure to include key vocabulary in both languages, so children were exposed to these two languages. I want to point out that this is not at all intended to happen, again, with every single word you teach. Again, you're being very strategic to pick words that are going to show up over and over again in a unit and become familiar to the children. But it's just like, it's a moment of exposure, of affirmation, of invitation. A couple of points that I want to make in terms of when you're working with languages and wanting to like hold the integrity of languages, is that you would write these words in the other languages after you've provided the other scaffolds, like the photos and the sketches. So that you introduce the word in the numerous languages after doing whatever work you're doing around frogs in English. And also you wouldn't offer direct translation. And so as such, you would not offer direct translations as you go. So if we're looking at the one on the left, we wouldn't talk about the egg and then add huevo, right? You're not doing that direct translation, because once children realize you're doing that, they're going to wait for the language that is most comfortable and familiar to them. So you're doing that whole activity in English, and then you would come back and ask children, does anybody know how to say this in Spanish? Or blah, 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 right? Okay. So if you're deeply immersed in a theme, this kind of targeted vocabulary will show up throughout the day and throughout your centers. Seize opportunities to come back to that targeted vocabulary. Who can remind me how to say be in Spanish or Portuguese or Urdu? And what do they drink? Who remembers how to say that in Spanish? Or today we are releasing ladybugs in our garden. We also all learned how to say this in our other classroom languages. Who remembers how else we can say ladybug, right? So you can come back to that. So again, it feels like an integrated part of the curriculum. Sharing books with children in the various languages of the classroom is another really powerful way to expose children to language and to make connections across the languages. While many more books are being published and translated into multiple languages, and while there are more and more bilingual books, it is still not particularly easy to find books that align with the themes in all the language one needs. Believe me, we have tried. So again, who can help you with this? What teacher assistant can read one of the books in Spanish to a small group of Spanish speakers? What teacher assistant or other staff might be able to translate one of your books into the language they speak? What parent might be able to help you with this? And it may be that they don't always read the entire book, especially the nonfiction books. Perhaps there's an adult who speaks Arabic who can look through a book on ladybugs that's already been read in English and share key vocabulary and have a short conversation with the one or two kids who also speak Arabic, right? It can be a quick 5-minute, let's gather around and do this special thing in our home language. It is most supportive of dual language learners if some of this happens at the beginning of the unit as they're getting into new content, because then they're being invited to tap into their own prior knowledge in their home language, and doing it anytime throughout the unit is super valuable. In this classroom, families were invited into the inn on Friday mornings to read to the children. Sometimes this happened in small homogeneous groups, so children had opportunities to hear stories in their own home language. And sometimes a parent would read a book to the entire class, so everybody was exposed to that language. And, you know, they were following along, looking at the pictures, they were hearing the language, you know, they were getting enough of the story while all these other things around language and affirming language were happening. And then there are songs and chants, which you've mentioned, which are such a powerful and fun way to expose children to language. Teachers work together to create this song about the ladybug to accompany their insect unit. And just look how fun this is.
La mariquita es roja con puntos negros. Y cuando vuela, tiene que alzar sus élitros.
Come on.
La Mari.
All right, there we go. So here's another really lovely example of a class. They're in the midst of an ocean unit. A parent offered to come in during this unit and teach a song about the fish, about the fish of the ocean in Spanish. The mother recorded the song ahead of time for the teacher, so the teacher could also learn it. But the parent actually taught the song to the children. And then she and the teacher got the children up and singing with them and doing movements and gestures to help with comprehension. So again, did the kids understand everything in that song? Probably not. And that's in this moment, not the main purpose, right? That really what's happening is that we're really building a safe and welcoming environment for children and families that in turn strengthen the family school partnership that Marisol was talking about. I'll just say that in every unit, and even though I just said, don't do direct translations, it's actually not helpful for their language development. In every unit, it's also okay that one of the songs gets translated by the family, right? Like that's a way that they can participate, work with them to help translate, and then you can go from there. We just don't want to make it a habit. Okay, so it's also important that the languages of your children are visible. So while they're not attending to print at this age necessarily, the point is that you're taking the opportunity to highlight nuances across languages, variations and similarities of characteristics for letters, for example, that you model interest in making those comparisons. So here's an example. The teacher decided the class would learn to count from 1 to 10 in all 9 languages that were spoken in the class. And family members and children helped to teach the counting. And then family members would add to this poster, which eventually represented all the languages. So the children were hearing the words, producing those words, and then seeing them as they came alive in print. Really important pre-literacy set of skills being developed there. Here, a teacher hung this poster up on the front door of the classroom, inviting everyone to share the way they say fish in their language. And this was connected to an oceans unit. And so again, just think about the immediate message this gives of all languages being valued and welcomed in this space. And this is a great example of labeling things in the classroom. Again, not that the children are reading it, but what they can see is that their home languages have a space in the world of school and that they actually look different. There are similarities and differences in these different languages in print. And of course, you want to look for opportunities to invite and encourage children just to be using their home language. So observations is one great, easy, and powerful way to do so. Observation pictures are a collection of beautiful, intriguing pictures related to the unit that capture your attention, spark interest and curiosity, and are carefully selected to ensure they support key concepts and vocabulary. They can be used to call up children's already existing knowledge of a topic or for them to share what they're learning about regarding the topic. So with you prompting them with questions such as, what do you see? What do you think this is? What should we find out about that? Or later in the unit, what can you tell me about the characteristics of the ladybug? Or what have you learned about the ladybug? And building off this idea of conducting small groups in children's home languages, consider what other collaborative projects are tied to the thematic content that you're studying that you might do. So here's one example. In an insect unit, you might organize children into small groups based on the language that they speak at home. And each group then decides what insect they would like to study, or perhaps more simply, you might just assign each group an insect and provide a bunch of really inspiring books as well as other materials. And then with the assistance of an adult who speaks that language, the group will read some books about that insect, look at photographs and talk about them in their home language, perhaps watch a video if it's available in that home language. And with the adult as scribe, collect some main ideas about the insect on a graphic organizer like this, or perhaps they'll create a poster together about the insect with the adult taking dictations about what they're drawing. The idea is to give this small language specific groups opportunities to use their language. All right. Oh, I see what happened. Okay, here we go. So as we come to the end of today, I'm going to return now to our, do we do this one right now, Marisol? Yes, we do.
Yes.
Sorry, everyone. I thought this was at the end. Okay, so I just put out 7 or so ways to bring home language into instruction. And so I'd love to hear from you in chat. What is one way you would like to incorporate home language into instruction? It might be that you do it in the next few weeks before you go off for the summer, like just, go for it and experiment. Or it might be that you're storing it away and thinking about how you can incorporate this in the fall. Go ahead and share what is feeling particularly exciting and interesting to you. People are excited about the songs and chants. Yeah, there's such an easy, natural way to do this work. Absolutely. Especially when you're being thoughtful about it connecting to the thematic content. Visible language in the classroom, so they're seeing it. Yeah. Really tapping into families to say how to say keywords and then folding those into the classroom. Wonderful. Asking the children if they can share how to say things. I love that. I love positioning them as the language expert. It's a really, because then they can feel pride in that, right? Great. All right, wonderful. Okay, so now we're going on to our final guiding question. What prompts connected to the content can you send home to support conversations about the content being explored in the classroom between children and family members in their home language? Wow, that's a mouthful. In other words, how can you support this work carrying over into the homes where they can do it much more deeply in their home language? Homeschool connections and projects create opportunities for families to contribute to and build on the thematic content that's being learned in schools. They support families in engaging their children and talking about what's being learned in school. Conversations happening at school are reinforced by conversations at home and vice versa. So these home school connections are teacher-initiated prompts and activities that are meant to be simple, but encourage those conversations. They're meant to be engaging and joyful to bring families together. So it's important that the prompts are open-ended and that they don't require families to have specific knowledge or experience with a particular topic. Oh. All right, so here are some examples. This is from a farm unit. Families were asked to talk with their children about their favorite farm animals. This teacher put them into a binder then, which lived in the classroom library and was available for the children and their families to look at together. So you can see these aren't like complex, big assignments. They're really meant to be jumping off places for conversation. Here are 2 examples from an insects unit. The one on the left asks families to take a walk around the neighborhood looking for insects, to talk about what they see and to draw some of the insects seen. And the one on the right invites families to look in their garden or another local garden to see how many insects and different kinds of insects they find. And then family projects are a more in-depth form of homeschool connections that we ask families to engage in with their children. So this is from a either buildings unit or community builders unit. And, we look at these and we can think, did the preschooler really do this by themselves? Well, no, probably not. Clearly there was a lot of adult involvement, which is the point, right? So just imagine the quality of time during this project and the conversations in the home language that were happening as they worked on this together. So you then want to create opportunities after they've done the conversation or done the projects at home. You want to create opportunities for children along with their families to then come back into the classroom to share these projects with the class. This is such a moment of pride for the children and a really important bridge between family and the school. In the Multilingual Learner Toolkit, you can find both the write-up for this strategy as well as a great accompanying video under sections 1D and 1E of family engagement. It's after the families have done family projects at home, and now they've all come back into the classroom and they're sharing their beautiful insect art. And you can see this is a photo from it. It's a really beautiful video. All right. So please head back into chat. What is one aha you are having about homeschool connections? The shared learning. Yes, it is such a back and forth, and we want to honor that and remember that and then leverage it. Absolutely. That it's supporting quality time at home. Yes. That it's an ongoing building of relationships with families, how much these can enrich the classroom and each student's experience. Watch that video. You see it. It's so beautiful in this video. Great. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So this is where I thought we were. Now we really are here. So I want to just return to these 4 guiding questions. And just because these can really guide you as you look for the regular opportunities to support home language development through the content. Right? So by asking these questions, it helps you hone in on what are you focusing on in the classroom? How then do you really partner with your families to support that? And then within the content, where are those opportunities to bring in home language? So I would keep these questions somewhere. I think they're just really helpful. And then these are the main buckets of opportunities that we looked at today. And again, really just thinking about like how, where and how do these live, and how can they live in our space? And so this is just kind of a summary of that will be available to you. And then finally, as we get ready to wrap up this session that went by really fast in my mind, I'll invite you to go into chat one last time and just share, what are you leaving feeling just appreciative of or excited about? What just kind of energized you from what we just all explored together? Yay, just bringing it back to the ECE kids. Yes. Good. I'm glad that they felt practical. Our goal is to make this as accessible as possible and to also kind of, just make it accessible. Great. Yay. A lot of ideas about working with families around this. I'm so glad. Oh, good. I'm so happy to hear that, Fatima. Just like that, this actually affirms what your program is already supporting. So that's wonderful. I'm so glad that you're getting that affirmation. Feeling really inspired that the tide has turned towards seeing multiliteracy. I know, right? Like you see those myths and how prevalent, and it's just like, oh, it's so painful. And then to realize, but we have turned a corner and our little people are having a very different experience. Thank you all so much for this deep level of engagement. I'm going to hand the floor over to Carolyn, who's going to close us up for the day.
Thank you, Cory. And just want to say thank you to both Cory and Marisol for their wonderful presentation and for these great strategies and resources that they shared. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Please also take a moment to complete our short evaluation survey, which will drop in the chat right now. And please also stay tuned. We'll be sending a follow-up email for you to access the resources that they mentioned during the webinar, and also your certificate of attendance. And then Trish put in to the chat in case you missed the first 2 sessions, we have them recorded on our website. So please feel free to access those and share them with others. And thank you once again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure.